The studio lights were warm, but Jamie Dornan felt cold. He sat across from the interviewer, hands folded, eyes distant. The question had been simple enough. What's the moment in your life that changed you the most? Yet it struck him like a wave he wasn't ready for. He smiled faintly, as if trying to buy himself time. Then, after a long pause, his voice cracked just slightly. "Being forgiven by Amelia," he said softly. And then, almost whispering, "That was the greatest gift of my life." The room went silent, cameras rolled, but for a few seconds, no one breathed. To those who didn't know him beyond the movies, Jamie Dornan was the picture of calm, composed, charming, successful. But behind the cool exterior was a man who had carried the weight of regret longer than most would guess. It wasn't one mistake, not one headline or one argument. It was a collection of moments, small, careless, human moments, that built into a wall between him and the woman who had been his anchor since the very beginning. Amelia Warner had always been the quiet force in Jamie's storm. While the world saw his fame, she saw his fears. She was the one who turned their house into a home, who reminded him that being loved didn't mean being perfect. And yet, somewhere along the way, Jamie had forgotten to be present. When 50 Shades of Grey took over the world, everything changed. Overnight, he went from being a working actor to being the name on every tabloid, every screen, every whisper of gossip. The glare was relentless, and though Amelia stood by him, the distance grew silently, like fog rolling in without warning. He told himself it was temporary, that once the noise faded, he'd make it right. But fame has a way of reshaping time. What feels like months outside feels like years at home. And by the time he realized how far he'd drifted, Amelia had already learned to live in the silence he'd left behind. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just small conversations that never finished. Dinners eaten in silence. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Jamie would come home to find her reading by the window, her expression soft but unreadable. And somehow, that quiet hurt more than any argument ever could. "She never blamed me," Jamie later said in that same interview. "That's what broke me the most. She never raised her voice. She just stopped expecting me to fix it." One night, after returning from yet another trip, Jamie found a note on the kitchen counter. Not a goodbye, but a reminder. It read, "You're chasing everything but forgetting what you already have." He sat there for hours, reading the line over and over. It was gentle, but it hit harder than any accusation. That was the moment the guilt truly sank in. He realized he'd been living two lives, one for the cameras, and one where Amelia waited in silence. He tried to change, but apologies are fragile when words have already lost their weight. There were weeks of awkward small talk, of trying to reconnect through old routines, making breakfast for the kids, long walks that ended in silence. He thought she might never truly forgive him. "I think she saw the worst version of me," he admitted. "The kind of man who gets lost in his own noise." And she still chose to stay. It was months later, a quiet evening in winter, when it happened. No drama, no tears, no big conversation. They were sitting together after the kids went to bed, the fire burning low. Jamie had been apologizing again, his voice breaking as he said, "I don't deserve you." Amelia looked at him, her expression calm. She simply said, "Maybe not. But I forgive you." That was it. No lecture, no list of wrongs. Just forgiveness, quiet, graceful, absolute. Jamie remembered that moment vividly. The way the room felt still. The way his heart stopped and then began to ache in a way that felt almost holy. "I broke down," he confessed. "Because forgiveness isn't something you can ask for, it's something you can only hope for. And she gave it to me freely." In that instant, he realized how love endures not through perfection, but through mercy. As the interview wrapped, Jamie's eyes glistened. "I've had success, fame, recognition, all of it fades. But Amelia's forgiveness, that changed who I am." He looked down for a moment, voice barely a whisper. "You don't really know love until someone forgives you at your worst. Forgiveness is quiet. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or music. It comes softly, like dawn breaking through a night you thought would never end. For Jamie Dornan, that moment with Amelia became the turning point of his entire life. The words, "I forgive you," echoed in his mind long after she had gone upstairs that night. They weren't just words, they were mercy, undeserved and absolute. The next morning, he woke before sunrise. The house was silent, filled with the kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he made breakfast, not out of guilt, but gratitude. As the smell of coffee filled the air, he realized how something so ordinary could feel like redemption. "I think forgiveness teaches you humility," he said later. "You realize you're not owed love, you're trusted with it." In the months that followed, Jamie began the slow, patient work of rebuilding. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic apologies, it was presence. He started showing up for the small moments again, walking the kids to school, cooking dinner, laughing at the messes that used to frustrate him. Amelia never brought up the past again. She didn't need to. Her forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about letting him become the man he was meant to be. And in that stillness, Jamie found the strength to be better. There were times when he would catch her watching him, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully, like she was relearning who he had become. He once asked her, "Why did you forgive me?" She smiled softly and said, "Because I saw the part of you that was still trying." Those words broke him all over again. Jamie began writing letters he never sent, small notes of reflection, gratitude, and honesty. He wrote about his fears, about the loneliness of fame, about how easily success can trick you into believing you're whole. And most of all, he wrote about Amelia, how her silence had once scared him, and how now, it brought him peace. "I used to think love was passion, noise, fire," one letter read. "Now I know it's forgiveness whispered in the dark." When asked in another interview if he believed in second chances, Jamie smiled. A real, grounded smile this time. "I do," he said. "Because I'm living one." The journalist asked if he could elaborate. Jamie looked down for a moment, then said, "When Amelia forgave me, she didn't just save our marriage, she saved me from myself. You can't measure that in anything but grace." His words resonated far beyond the screen. Fans shared them online, calling it Jamie's most honest confession. For once, the story wasn't about scandal or fame, it was about redemption. About love surviving the quiet storms. One evening, while promoting a new film, Jamie was asked what kept him grounded despite everything. His answer was simple. "Family," he said, "and the fact that I get to come home to people who know the real me, the good and the flawed, and love me anyway." The crowd applauded, but Jamie didn't smile for the cameras. He smiled because it was true. Later that night, at home, Amelia joined him on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. They didn't talk much. She rested her head on his shoulder while he held her hand, a simple, steady gesture that said more than words ever could. He thought back to all the times he had taken this for granted, and his eyes filled with tears. Amelia noticed but didn't say anything. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, as if to remind him that everything was okay now. Jamie blinked back the tears, whispering, "Being forgiven by you is still the greatest gift of my life." Amelia smiled, "Then don't waste it." And he never did. In the months that followed, Jamie became more open about the lessons he'd learned. He talked less about fame and more about balance, about how the truest success is measured not by achievements, but by the people who still stand beside you when you fall. He once said in a quiet podcast conversation, "I think love is choosing someone again, even after you've seen every reason not to. Amelia chose me again. That's something I'll spend the rest of my life earning." And that, perhaps, was the most beautiful part of his story, not that he was forgiven, but that he became worthy of the forgiveness he received. As the world watched him continue to shine, Jamie knew the truth that fame could never touch. Peace doesn't come from applause. It comes from being known, being loved, and being forgiven.